This is going to be fun. I'm noting it an hour and 5 minutes into this that we're doing a kind of a little bit different. We're not doing a top 10 this week. Thank God, Josh, that we only have to pick 6 teams instead of 10, because picking the 10th best team in the country this year or this week it would be awful. What we're going to do, y'all, is we're going to pick, Josh and I are going to do our own top 6 rankings, and then what we think the committee's top 6 will be. Josh, do you have yours ready?
Just about. If you start, I'll be ready by the time you go.
So I'm going to do my top 6. You can do your top 6, and then we'll kind of talk through what we think the top 6 for the committee is going to be. I've got Georgia shocking. I've got Georgia number 1. They handled their business today. 50 points on a talented, maybe not great LSU defense. I've got Michigan number 2, even if they lose tonight, because I think they earned it in the regular season. I think that my thing is the same criticism you had earlier about the committee. You should set these teams up to rank them in such a way that they can play their way up with a great performance against a great team in a conference championship game, but not necessarily play their way out of a position relative to teams that are sitting at home. And the committee did not do that. But for me, I would do that. I've got Michigan number 2, win, lose, or draw, because right behind them, I've got Ohio State. And I think that the loss today for TCU, it was a close loss. I think it was close, which kept Alabama out. If that game would have ended up the way it was trending and Kansas State won that game 42-20, I would have put Alabama in the playoffs for sure. But in the least, I'm sticking by what I said earlier today. Everybody wants to talk about Ohio State's margin of loss against Michigan. Nobody wants to talk about Ohio State's margin of victory against every other team they played this year, including a double-digit win on the road at Penn State, who I've got in my rankings. While TCU had 5 one-score wins against multiple backup quarterbacks. I think there's part of a schedule that if you have to play a lot of it where there's good teams back-to-back, even if they're not elite, it makes it really challenging. And TCU, an 8-point win over SMU, that's a team that Ohio State's going to beat by 40 points. It just is. So I've got Ohio State ahead of them because I think it's fair. It's totally fair to ding them for that 22-point loss at home against Michigan. But you got to do it. You got to look at it for everybody else. You can't just judge one team in a silo. I've got TCU number 4 ahead of Alabama. Alabama fans are going to be mad at me. I do think Alabama is a better football team than TCU. But look, LSU, they had no business losing to LSU. They had no business not scoring in the second half against Mississippi State or having a 1-score win against Ole Miss. I don't think these are great teams. And Alabama has a overall good season, not great season. And I'm not entirely sure that Alabama doesn't have the same or worse record as TCU if they swap schedules. Now, I think TCU loses 2 games with Alabama's schedule, but I'm not sure Alabama goes undefeated in the regular season in the Big 12 this year. They've got more talent than anybody. But, Josh, they don't have the coaching, and I think we're going to see a change in that in the offseason. Finally, number 6, I've got Penn State ahead of Tennessee, and I do think part of this is what the committee said in the past they do. I don't know that they're doing it this year, but they have said in the past that they weigh significant injuries. They said it the very first ranking they did in 2014, they considered injury. I'm considering it here. I've got Penn State ahead, and also Penn State, after their loss, killed everybody. Nobody got close to them, and that deserves some credit. So I've got Penn State number 6, and not just because Stephen Light is my homeboy. Give me your top 6.
So this is my top 6, right? What I would personally pick. Is that right?
Correct. Then we'll talk through what we think the committee will do together.
Yep. Just double check. This is going to sound familiar. My number 1 is Georgia. I don't think there's really any question to that with where they're at, with how they played today, how they've done over the course of the season. My number 2, as you said, win or lose, is Michigan. And the reason for that is Worst case, they've got one. They're going to have one loss compared to Ohio State's one loss. They played Ohio State. They beat Ohio State. They really only have a loss by virtue of the fact that they would have had to play this game. Now they're winning right now, and I don't expect them to lose. But even if they do, still going to have Michigan at number 2. They're not going to get blown out at this point in the game. But certainly with a win, they have to be number 2. And let me just take a second to note there. People get confused on how you draw this. And look, these are such fine subjective lines that it's never completely, utterly consistent or clear. But the way I look at it in terms of not punishing a team for playing the extra conference championship game, we talked about this earlier. You go watch our full live show video if you're watching a cut up of this. It really basically comes down to the fact that is that conference championship game confirming or telling us something we didn't know, or is this just an extra loss by the virtue of you had an extra opportunity to lose? And this will be just an extra opportunity to lose situation. And I've also often said, once you get multiple losses, that head-to-head thing starts to really go away, because that extra data point can move the needle way past the head-to-head. The head-to-head really only works when you're talking about a single loss, either in the conference champions or conference standings or national standings in terms of overall losses. So Michigan 2, I have Ohio State 3. I agree with you. I mean, I think, and this gets back to the point I just made, Ohio State lost to Michigan in, whether you want to call it a blowout or not. I mean, it was a competitive game until relatively late, but I also think they got kind of outclassed and out physical, and you've got to throw that into perspective. But what I saw from Ohio State over the course of the season was a lot of dominance. Like you said, with a Penn State game, there's something to be said when you walk out there and you walk away with 2 scores over Penn State. There's something to be said with the way they put away a lot of teams like Iowa. And we did not see that much from TCU. And TCU was undefeated in the regular season, unlike Ohio State. They have an extra win over Ohio State. But again, this gets into the realm of, I think that conference championship game really just confirmed to me what I already thought was the case, that TCU was a team that was just a little bit better, and they were on a run, and they won their games. And yep, I'm all for that. I think that is something that has to creep in. It's why I have TCU number 4, but it also kind of limits them. And our model last week had TCU 28, Kansas State 24. And that was a signal of the fact that even though TCU was undefeated, they were just marginally better than the other teams in their conference. And so I think you have to rank them number 4 because they did go undefeated. And to your point, I can't say that Alabama would have gone undefeated with the same schedule, as inconsistent as they were this year. They had all the talent in the world, but they did not play anywhere near that potential. And it wasn't just inconsistency. They were consistently inconsistent. Like, they were consistently not performing to the capability. TCU was kind of maxing it out in every game. They were consistently good at every team relative to their talent level. And you've got to reward that. So I can't do it over Ohio State, who only has the same one loss, just like TCU does. Neither one of them's a conference champion. TCU is not even a divisional champion because they threw away divisions. But Alabama, who's my number 5 team, I've got no reason to think that they wouldn't have dropped a game with TCU schedule. They almost lost to Texas, just like TCU did. They struggled with a lot of teams that weren't particularly good. They just haven't been dominant all year. And when you throw in the fact that they've got 2 losses, they've got to be there. If they had one loss, and even if that one loss was LSU and that put LSU in the conference championship game over them, I would absolutely have Alabama over TCU, because I believe if Alabama is a better quality team.
Speaking of championship week, we got a championship clothing line, Bird Dogs. It's sponsoring the College Football Nerds for 2022, and I'm going to talk about shorts because I work from home, so I don't have to wear pants that much. I do wear Bird Dogs pants when I go travel for work, which is rare. I'm going to do a little product demo, but not like Josh, who gave you all the booty. I'm just showing you the pants or the shorts so I can show you this liner. I can show you how good they look. And Josh, I love the shorts. I work out in them all the time. I wear them. I honestly, I know this is silly. I sleep in them. I work in them. I work out in them, multiple pairs. And Bird Dog sent us some product, just full disclosure, but the joke's on them. I already had a bunch of Bird Dog stuff. But you're a president business. You're an attorney. So you have to wear pants. It's kind of a requirement when you go into the office. So talk about Bird Dogs in the pants department.
When you say that, I normally don't wear pants, but Bird Dogs have been so comfortable that I can't help but wear them. And I'm wearing them, right now. So yeah, they're comfy. They've got pants that are professional slacks. They've got joggers, kind of wearing the joggers right now, chilling behind the camera. And I mean, it's hard to fault them. They're cheaper than Lululemon. I think they're just as good quality, and they fit well for men. So it's definitely been a good product.
So go to birddogs.com, enter promo code NERDS. Used to be CFB Nerds, but NERDS, and that's 2Ds, birddogs.com. They'll throw in a free Bird Dogs rope hat. That's birddogs.com, promo code NERDS, and boom, free Bird Dogs rope hat with your pair of Bird Dogs. The most comfortable shorts, pants, and sweatpants with built-in liners. You will not want to take these things off. I promise you.
Than TCU. But my view of best team is a team that is least likely to lose in a given week, is the best way I put it. Sometimes being the best average quality, overall quality, doesn't mean you're less likely to lose, because you might also be very inconsistent. Deviation versus average quality mean. Alabama just hasn't been very consistent. And my sixth team is, like you, Penn State. And same sort of calculus, the same calculus I think the committee often has talked about. I struggle with this, with Penn State versus Tennessee, and there are going to be a lot of people probably that go back and forth on this one, and I think it probably with good reason. Penn State has 2 losses to high-quality teams, to Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan game was a total blowout. Ohio State game was a lot closer, but still ended up being by a good margin. But outside that, what's their best win? I mean, Auburn, blowing out Auburn wasn't anything special. They didn't really hold up in SEC play either. I don't know. I mean, you look down the rest of the record, or rest of that conference record. I mean, is it like Maryland? I mean, you beat Purdue, but you beat them by 4. So I'm not really sure what it is. And with Tennessee, who's the other option for me with 6th, yeah, they have a terrible loss to South Carolina, and a South Carolina team that did. I mean, they punked Clemson the next week, so they clearly were playing good football at the end. Much better football than they were earlier. Rattler is a 5-star for a reason, and he actually played like it for once. But their wins over Alabama, LSU, Kentucky, Missouri, Florida, Pitt, even. I mean, they beat a lot of pretty good teams. They beat a number of teams that are elite teams. The loss to Georgia was only 27-13. As much as they got beat up in that game, was only 2 scores. There are a lot of reasons to put Tennessee ahead. And I would say if Hendon Hooker had stayed healthy, I would have Tennessee over Penn State. But like you, without Hendon Hooker, if I was doing a playoff ranking, I cannot put Tennessee up there. And it's a shame, but that is not the same team without Hendon Hooker. They are not going to play at the same level. I've seen Joe Milton play before for them, and he's not anywhere near the same quarterback. So that's my top 6: Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, TCU, Alabama, Penn State. So my question back to you is, do you think there are any changes with how the committee is going to rank the top 6 relative to what actually, as it turned out, both of us picked?
Yeah, I think the committee is going to flip Ohio State and TCU. They have said in the past that they try. I think they have said they try to avoid rematches if they can. I think they'll flip it and say, TCU wasn't sitting at home, Ohio State was. I think it's garbage if they do flip it. Honestly, Ohio State would be favored on a neutral field. Ohio State is on quality a better team. Ohio State has played a tougher schedule. Ohio State has a much better win. I just don't know. Like, I don't know how you. The thing is, if you just look at win-loss records, okay. If you just look at the fact that TCU was playing and Ohio State wasn't, okay. TCU didn't have to play Michigan. TCU didn't have to play Penn State. So that's a little frustrating to me. I think that they're going to do that. And I'll say this, I don't know that Georgia needs any favors at this point, but I don't think it's fair that the number 1 overall seed will have to play the better team. And maybe TCU could beat Ohio State on a neutral field or whatever, but I think Ohio State is harder to prepare for. And I think they'll probably have Tennessee ahead of Penn State since they had Tennessee ahead last week, but I wouldn't have.
Yeah, it is interesting because they kept Tennessee ahead of Penn State. And I do agree with you. Because of that signals to me they're going to keep them ahead. And this gets to something I said. Again, you go back and listen to our live show. We've talked about a lot of different things in there, including the committee. The committee has not ranked consistent with their former criteria. They've talked about the effect of a quarterback loss in playoff rankings. That keeping Tennessee higher throws that away. They've talked about how they only rank on what you've done to this point, but they ranked USC ahead of Ohio State when Ohio State had a better resume purely because USC was going to be in the conference championship game. They hadn't done that previously. They had only done that, only given you any sort of account for the fact that you were a conference champion leader or division leader or whatever once you actually won the division in the conference. So there's a lot of inconsistencies there. But I do think you're right. I think Tennessee's probably going to be ahead of Penn State. I think TCU is going to be ahead of Ohio State because I think they're going to do – I think they may even admit it, but they're going to do gymnastics to avoid a Michigan-Ohio State rematch in round one. They're going to try to get different matchups in round one. So they're going to want to see Georgia have to play Ohio State so Michigan can play TCU to set up a potential Michigan-Ohio State game in the championship if they get there. The committee has said before that they were maybe amenable to that. And then they've said other times where, no, we're just going to rank 1 to 4, whoever's best to worst, it doesn't matter. I do think that they want to avoid rematches if all things are equal. And I think there's enough here for them to do some gymnastics and say, well, Ohio State and TCU is a really tough call, but we don't want to rematch in round one. Then they're going to flip them. But I really think should be Ohio State 3 and TCU 4, but I doubt that's the way it's going to go. And I don't think there's any question in my mind. In my mind, and do you agree with this, Daniel? I am closer to having Alabama over TCU than I have TCU over Ohio State in my head.
100%. 100%. And look, like Michigan fans will tell us we're a little too Ohio State biased or whatever. I'm not talking about Ohio State as a brand. I'm not talking about the logo. I'm not talking about their history. I'm talking about what they've done this year. They've played 2 teams better than anybody TCU's played. And I keep going back to this thing where they lost to a Kansas State team who I don't think is bad. And honestly, if Kansas State gets matched up with Alabama and Alabama has a bunch of opt-outs, I'm probably going to pick Kansas State. I think they've got a really good head coach. And I think they found something at quarterback. But Kansas State also lost to Tulane. They were a 3-loss team. And Penn State, their 2 losses were Ohio State and Michigan, and then they lost to Michigan. Ohio State did. I don't think that people appreciate that as much as they should.
Let me note one thing people bring it up in the chat, too, when you talk about rankings and where they go. People always want to say, well, the top team should get to pick who their opponent is. No coach, no AD wants to call out the team they play in round one. They absolutely, positively do not want to say, yeah, we think TCU sucks. Let's play them. Like, that is a motivational landmine. It is a political landmine. They do not want that. Like, that is something that sounds good in a bubble, but in a reality where you actually have to play human beings and motivation, and you got to meet somebody at a conference. No, they do not want to do that. The system should not be built that way. Everyone would hate it that had to make that call.
Josh, a lot of people in the chat are telling us that we're TCU haters because Alabama almost lost to Texas. But I will turn immediately around and say that TCU should have lost to Baylor. Baylor should have slow played their subs. They needed a first down. Baylor needed a first down to end that game, and they went conservative, ended up punting, and lost the game by the skin of their teeth. And Baylor lost, I think, by double digits to Texas. So this round robin transitive property thing, again, I want to remind everybody TCU beat SMU by 8 points, and they played Colorado out of conference. So Alabama, before they even got into their SEC schedule, played TCU's best win on the road, like just out of conference, just as an extra. So I don't necessarily like. And look, y'all are calling us TCU haters. We have them in over Alabama, so both of us do. So I don't think that that's entirely fair. We're going to point out the flaws because that's what this whole thing is. Because we don't have a 130 team playoff, we're going to call out both sides. But everyone in the chat, except for 1 or 2 people, would pick Alabama on a neutral field versus TCU with a month to prepare. And that's okay, though, because like we've both said, Alabama has been inconsistent. They have their coaches to blame, and they got to sit this one out.